I first found I was pregnant with my first child September of 2010, and I was with my then husband, and we were super excited about it and really excited to have our first child. The pregnancy actually went pretty well. There wasn't any complications. It was really a normal pregnancy the whole time. There was some minor stressors because he was just getting out of the Army, so we were there, and we happened to live in Washington State at that time for every one of them. So, but everything was pretty normal until I was working as a legal assistant at a law firm. So I was working and I had to go to the bathroom, and I ended up bleeding. I got really freaked out because you don't just bleed when you're pregnant. And then I called my husband, and we were like, well, I have to go to the hospital, obviously. But I had left my ID at home, so I rushed home and met him there. And when I had to use the bathroom, so when I used the bathroom again, I felt a bulge, and that's when I felt the water break. At that point, I was about 19 and a half weeks, and I we drove to the hospital, which was on base at Madigan Army Medical Center in Tacoma, Washington. And we waited in the ER for a couple hours because they didn't have a spot open, and when you're not 20 weeks or more, you can't go to labor and delivery. They have to ask specifically if labor and delivery will take you. So on the off chance they had room in labor and delivery, so I went there. They did an ultrasound, and the baby's heart was beating, but it was slow, and they could tell that the amniotic fluids weren't in and around her, and it was starting to leak. They said the only option for me was to wait until the baby's heartbeat stopped to deliver, or to go to a different hospital and see if they could deliver the baby with a heartbeat, but the baby still wouldn't make it. 2 days prior to that, we ended up finding out it was a girl, so we had a name picked out. So we were super excited about it, but really sad that we couldn't see our baby girl. While waiting in the delivery room, we just decided that we were already here and might as well wait until the baby's heartbeat stopped. At around 10 o'clock, her heartbeat stopped, and they ended up inducing me to start labor and giving me an epidural. Labor didn't really start. There really wasn't too much for me to do. I only had to be about 4 centimeters to deliver. Once I was then about that, they would check me off and on to see if the baby came. At about 5 a.m. on January 21st, 2011, our little girl was born. Her name was Lillian Jean Landrosh, and she was super tiny, really, really beautiful, but really tiny. I got to hold her, which was really great, and the nurses took pictures, and they put her in this cute little basket with this bear, and it was really adorable. My ex-husband got to hold her too. Well, now then husband, he's ex now, but he got to hold her too, and it was just beautiful. We were able to talk to the nurses about what to do. There was no option at that point to figure out how you bury a baby. There just wasn't anything. They told us that luckily almost every single one of the funeral homes that are around do it for free, so because of a child, and that was super encouraging, but really tough because when you don't know, you just get so bombarded with so much stuff that you can't think, and super sad. We ended up talking to a chaplain about it to make sure that we were strong on God and make sure that we were okay with some questions, and it turned out okay. We had a service afterwards where a couple of my family members flew in from Minnesota to Washington, and they ended up being really supportive and really nice. But the issue is that when people find out that you lost a child, not only do you find out others do, they just don't know what to say. They become really insensitive. You tend to find out who people end up wanting you to be their friend and who don't, because they can't handle how much pain you're in. They just don't know. Here's here's her urn. It was green and has little flowers on it. Okay. And then here's a picture of her with a little teddy bear. The nurses and doctors there, they asked if we wanted footprints and handprints, and we accepted. And it was one of the times where I'm super glad that we did. That way, that was one of the few memories that we could look back on and love to see. You know, when your baby's 19 and a half weeks, you don't know. You know, you expect a full-term baby to have handprints and footprints, and they luckily were able to give us those, so it was really nice. So that was January 2011. A few months after that, I found out I was pregnant again. We were really nervous because they had told us that the reason that she was born early was a fluke, and because I had an infection. They said, well, you know, it could have been caused of an infection that you had, or it could have just been a fluke. They didn't really know. They took a couple tests when found out I was pregnant with my second one, and they had just said, you know, we'll just monitor you closely. You know, every 2 weeks or so, 2 weeks to once a month, I went in for an ultrasound to make sure that the baby was doing great. We found out at about 19 and a half weeks that we were having a boy, so we were really excited. And I had passed the point of what we would call no return. So I was even more excited that we were finally going to have a baby, and it was going to be full term and great. And at that point, my then husband, he had to go in June or July to Minnesota from Washington for a job. So I was left at home with a roommate by myself to just take care of our animals and just stay no stress. Unfortunately, that didn't exactly happen. On September 23rd, I was having really bad pains and started bleeding again. And I called the hospital I was at, or called my doctor, and they said, well, you need to come in. You're having contractions and you're bleeding, and that's like a huge deal. They asked if I wanted an ambulance, and where we lived in Washington compared to where the hospital was 45 minutes. So the ambulance would end up taking 45 minutes to get there and 45 minutes back, and I chose to drive instead. So I drove from our house to 45 minutes with contractions 3 minutes apart to get to the hospital, because there was no other option for me. All my other friends lived between a half hour and 45 minutes away. So I drove all that way with 3 minutes contractions, waited for someone to talk to me and tell me that what was going on. It took a long time. The doctors weren't really there. The nurses were like, you're fine. And I'm like, I'm not fine. Like, you know, I'm having contractions. They brought me into a room. This time the contractions were a lot shorter together, and they hurt really, really bad. And there was nothing they could do. They said until my water broke, they couldn't do anything, and that they would just have to let it go and continue going. So I ended up laying on the bed, and my water broke all over, and that was at 20 and a half weeks. My friends came. Like I said, my husband was in Minnesota, and he couldn't fly out till the next day. So I was in the hospital for a long time, probably 12 or so hours or more. We just waited. Again, it was the same thing. You can only deliver when you're so many centimeters above that. At 2:08 in the morning, I delivered a beautiful baby boy named Arthur John, or AJ, what like we call him. And a couple of my friends were there, but they had to leave, so I was left in the hospital by myself until the morning. Then my friends drove me to my house. Before that, though, luckily the hospital was able to take pictures, do footprints again. This time we got a death certificate because it was over 20 weeks. They took beautiful pictures, not the best ones as I would recall, and they did do hand and footprints. I feel like different hospitals have different ways of taking pictures of your child and how caring they are too. I never knew about any program or anything. In our minds, we were supposed to be moving from Washington to Minnesota, and so there was so much going on at that time as well that I didn't even think about any sort of, or know of any help with how to deal with losing 2 children now and how to save those pictures and be able to grieve. My husband ended up coming home from Minnesota that day, the 24th of September, 2011, in the afternoon. We were packing and ready to go. I flew out with my sister to go back home so he could drive the truck. And 2 days before he was supposed to go, he found out that we would be staying in Washington. So we ended up deciding that we would have a service in Minnesota with other family. And we decided that it would be the best option to have it at my grandfather's grave. Because we couldn't have the niche where Lily was born, because we were in Minnesota. So we had all our family there. I chose songs, and I chose my siblings to say something. No one tells you how to plan a funeral. You just have to do it on your own. You never know when your baby dies, what sort of funeral to plan, what flowers to pick out, what songs to choose. You just don't know that information. On our way back from Minnesota to Washington, I ended up getting 2 phone calls from people who said, "I'm really sorry for your loss, but think of the good times. Think of all the great memories you had. Think about your next child you're gonna have." I mean, they were trying to be sincere, but it's really awful things. A couple months later, I ended up making a birth announcement that I sent out to my family for both Lily and Arthur John, or AJ. And someone told me that I was just asking for sympathy and empathy, and that I should really let it go. And to not be so vocal about it, because it doesn't do anything for anybody, and it only causes more issues. So, although my family and everyone was supportive, when someone says those things, it's really hard to forget. So I tried to find a support group in Washington. I found one. I was lucky to sit around, but there wasn't anyone that was Christian-based that I could say, "Oh yeah, why does God do these things? Why does these things happen to so many people? How come it happened to me twice?" There are no answers. The only answer I got was, maybe it's high blood pressure. We don't know, and it probably is because your blood pressure was so high. For months, that's what I got. There was no answers. So this is the urn of AJ. And then here is his picture. A few months after that, in March of 2012, I found out I was pregnant again. Obviously, we were super worried and concerned, and I went to a high-risk specialty doctor who monitored me the whole pregnancy. Each pregnancy I went through, the pregnancy itself was fine. Nothing happened in between the time I was pregnant to the time I delivered. At that time, my now ex-husband did not want to stay with me anymore because he couldn't take not having a child. And he had said that if this child didn't make it, our marriage wasn't going to make it. So I had high hopes, extreme high hopes for this one. They had said that there wasn't anything wrong with my blood, there wasn't anything wrong, it was just blood pressure. So from probably 13 weeks on, I ended up going to Seattle, which was about an hour and a half away, once a month to get my blood pressure checked, to get all these tests done, and to take all this medicine. But June 14th of 2012, I ended up bleeding again and calling my doctor, and they said, come to the hospital right away. And I went to put on my shoes, and my water broke all over my shoes. And I knew that this one wasn't going to make it. And we hadn't even had the exam to figure out if it was a boy or girl yet. I was only 18 and a half weeks, and we were supposed to in a couple days. I went to the hospital where my doctor worked at. She couldn't get in at the moment, but they put me into a room. They told me that they would have to induce me, and they could either give an epidural or they could just do drugs. And I said, well, I'd rather just have the drugs. I'm not in any pain or anything, so we're okay. So we get there, and they put me in a room, and they're checking me, and everything seems on track, minus the fact that my baby's heartbeat wasn't beating anymore, and that I was going to deliver another stillborn child. At that point, everyone said it's going to take a long time. I told my husband to go to a doctor appointment he had. I told my friend who was with me to go to the cafeteria to eat lunch. And the doctor came in 5 minutes after I told everyone to leave and said, you're going to deliver the baby, it's coming. And I said, okay, I guess. I turned to the nurse and I said, can I please get some drugs? And they said, there's no time. You can't have any now. So they paged my friend to come back, and I delivered a beautiful baby boy who we named Logan Liam at 18 and a half weeks. Unfortunately, with this one, the placenta wouldn't come out, so I had to push, and they had to scrape the placenta out multiple times until they decided that I was in too much pain to not do that anymore, and I had to go in for a D&C. When I came out, they put me into a room with my son and my friends, and there was nothing else I could do. They took pictures again and took footprints again. I held him all night long until they would release me. And they told me that the reason that this happened was that I have a spontaneous incontinent cervix, and that they're really sorry that it had to happen 3 times for them to find out, and that the next time, at 13 weeks, they would stitch me up with a cerclage, and at 36 weeks they would close it, and that they would try to guarantee that that was it, but they couldn't. And they said that not every doctor will do it. So I have to be really careful for every doctor that I have. Here's a picture of him. And his urn. I didn't have a service for him. I didn't have a baby book for him. I lost most of my pictures. And a few months later, I had to leave. I had to leave Washington State and move to Minnesota, where my family was, because my husband wanted a divorce. You don't go through 3 times of losing a child and not have something wrong. People don't understand what it's like to lose someone close. They think that if you lose a grandparent or a parent, that's really similar to losing a child, and it's not. Those hopes, those dreams, those exciting times, those are the things that you lose. There is no happy memory you have. You have a memory of a baby kicking you once, and then you have a memory of delivering your stillborn child. I was able to, on Logan's first birthday, throw him a birthday party. And although people thought I was crazy, I did it anyway. And that was the only thing I could think of to do with my family in Minnesota. I now am surrounded by people that care about me, that really are able to help me, but no one's been through what I've been through. I now constantly rely on my faith to get me through it, because that's the only way that I'd still be standing. Otherwise, I don't know where I'd be. I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry.
You don't have to say sorry. Oh, come here.
I've never told it from beginning to end before.